Hello, and welcome to Fear Drift. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slowly drifting into dark and unsettling stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, let your body sink into stillness, and allow the outside world to quietly disappear. Tonight, something waits for you in the dark, so close your eyes, listen carefully, and let yourself drift into fear. Story 1. I was 12 when I found it, and I still don't have a better word for what it looked like than wrong. It was lying right in the middle of the footpath, like someone had dropped a flattened piece of leather and forgotten to pick it up. At first I thought it was trash, maybe an old glove or a torn bag, because it had that dull brown color like something that had been left out in sun and rain for too long. But when I stepped closer, I saw it wasn't torn or cracked. It was smooth, almost polished, and it sat so flat against the ground that it looked pressed into the dirt, like it belonged there. The strangest part was the way it seemed out of place, without looking dramatic. It wasn't glowing, it wasn't moving, it wasn't making any noise. It just lay there as ordinary as a fallen leaf, and that made it worse. My stomach tightened the way it does when you realize you're alone on a street that suddenly feels empty. I stood there for a minute, breathing hard through my nose, trying to decide whether I should just keep walking. I wasn't a kid who screamed at spiders or believed every ghost story, but I did have a rule. One my dad drilled into me when we went camping. If you don't know what something is, don't touch it. So I didn't touch it, not at first. I looked around, half expecting someone to come out of the trees and tell me it was theirs. The neighborhood was quiet. It had rained earlier and the path smelled like wet dirt and crushed leaves. Somewhere far away, a dog barked and stopped. No one was there. I picked up a stick and poked the thing lightly, just once, the way you'd nudge a dead fish at the edge of a creek. It felt hard, like tapping a brick. Then it moved. Not like an animal, not like something alive the way we think of living things. It didn't wiggle or jerk. It inflated fast, like it sucked in a huge breath, then deflated immediately, collapsing back into its flat shape before my brain could catch up with what my eyes had seen. I pulled the stick back like it had bitten me. My heart jumped into my throat. For a second, I just stared, frozen, waiting for it to do it again. It didn't. It lay there as flat and quiet as before, like the movement had never happened. I remember thinking, stupidly, that it looked like a pancake made of leather. A weird, stiff pancake that didn't belong in the woods. And because I was 12, curiosity hit me harder than fear. Not the brave kind, the dumb kind, the kind that makes you feel like if you walk away, you'll regret it forever. I poked it again. Nothing. I poked it harder, right near the edge. It inflated and deflated again, even faster this time, like it was responding to pressure. My hands started shaking, not a lot, but enough that I noticed. I crouched down, careful not to put my knees too close. The thing had no smell, no obvious texture from where I was. It wasn't wet, even though the ground was damp. It didn't look like plastic, it didn't look like rubber, it didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. I had an urge, this is hard to explain, to hide it. Like the moment I found it, I became responsible for it. Like if someone else saw it, something bad would happen. That sounds dramatic, but that's honestly how it felt. Like the object had flipped a switch in my head that said, "Keep this secret." I used the stick to slide it off the path and into the brush where the weeds were thicker. Then I lay down on my stomach, keeping my face a safe distance away, and looked at it at ground level. I watched it for a long time, 20 minutes, maybe more. The world kept going around me. Wind in the trees, a bird somewhere, my own breathing. But the disc stayed still. It didn't move unless I touched it with the stick. I could have left it there. I should have left it there. But then I remembered something. My mom had mentioned there might be rain that night. She said it like a warning, like I shouldn't leave my bike outside. And I looked at the disc sitting in the weeds and thought, if it's not waterproof, if it gets ruined, no one will ever know what it was. And I know how that sounds, like I cared about it, like it mattered. Maybe it already did. I took my backpack off, unzipped it, and used the stick to nudge the disc inside. I didn't touch it with my hands. I didn't even let it scrape my skin. I dropped it in like I was putting away something fragile and dangerous at the same time, then zipped the bag shut quickly. As soon as the zipper closed, I felt a small vibration against my back. It wasn't strong. It wasn't like a phone. More like the faint buzz you feel when a car passes with heavy bass and the sound hits your bones. I froze, then lifted the bag off my shoulders and held it out in front of me. The vibration stopped. When I put the backpack on again, it started back up. It followed my movement like it was reacting to me. I walked home fast, not running, but fast enough that my legs got tired and my breath came in little bursts. By the time I reached my street, the sky had gone darker, and the air felt heavier, like rain really was coming. I slipped into the house like I was sneaking back from doing something I wasn't allowed to do. My mom and my sister were in the kitchen. I could hear dishes clinking and my mom talking about dinner. I kept my face calm, said hi like normal, and went straight to my room. As soon as I shut the door, I pulled the backpack onto my bed and unzipped it slowly, like I expected something to jump out. The disc lay inside, flat and still. I stared at it for a long time. The vibration had stopped completely. It looked harmless again, which made me feel crazy, like the woods had played a trick on me. I finally reached out and touched it with one finger. The cold went straight through me. It wasn't just cool like metal. It was freezing, like sticking your finger into a snowbank that's been sitting in shade for weeks. I yanked my hand back and shook it like I could shake the cold off. I grabbed a pair of winter gloves from my dresser. Even putting them on felt silly because it wasn't winter. But once the gloves were on, I picked the disc up with both hands. It was heavier than it looked. Not heavy like a rock, but heavy like something dense. Like it had more weight than it should for its size. When I lifted it, I noticed the bedspread underneath had turned black where it had been touching. Not burned, not wet, just black, like the color had been drained into the fabric. That scared me more than the cold. I needed to hide it better. We had an old camping cooler in the garage, one of those hard plastic ones we used when we went to the lake. I carried the disc, wrapped in a bath towel, into the half bathroom and set it on the tile floor, then went to the garage and dragged the cooler inside. I put the disc into the cooler like it was a frozen steak. Then I closed the lid and sat on the edge of the tub, breathing hard, listening. Nothing happened. No sound, no vibration, just quiet. I told myself I'd figure out what it was later. I told myself I'd show my dad when he got home, because dads are supposed to know what to do with weird things. But at the same time, I didn't want anyone else to see it. I didn't want it taken away. That night, I barely slept. Every time I started to drift off, I'd imagine the cooler lid popping open on its own, or I'd feel like something was humming just beneath the sound of the house. I kept getting up and checking the bathroom, pressing my ear to the cooler like I could hear it breathing. In the early morning, I finally fell asleep for real. And then a sound woke me. A low hiss, like fog pouring out of a freezer. I bolted out of bed and ran to the bathroom so fast, I didn't even feel the cold floor under my feet. My heart was pounding like I'd been chasing someone. The cooler lid was cracked open. White mist rolled out in thick waves, spilling over the sides and crawling across the tile floor like slow smoke. It wasn't like steam from hot water, it was cold fog, the kind you see coming off dry ice at a science show. I stared, frozen in place, and for a second I felt excited, like I was about to discover something amazing. Then the fog reached my ankles and the cold bit through my skin like needles. I grabbed my winter gloves again, pulled them on with shaking hands, and lifted the lid all the way. The fog thickened instantly. It poured out faster, filling the bathroom until the floor disappeared under white cloud. I leaned forward, squinting, trying to see inside. At first I thought the disc was gone. Then I saw it, down in the cooler, shining. Overnight, it had changed. It wasn't dull brown anymore. It looked smoother, almost metallic, like someone had polished it. And at the center of it, on the top surface, a small light glowed white, steady like a tiny Christmas bulb. The disc vibrated against the bottom of the cooler, and I felt the vibration through my gloves when I reached in and lifted it. It had gained weight, too. It felt like steel now, not just dense, but solid and cold, in a way that made my teeth chatter. As I held it, my gloves began to stiffen. Frost formed instantly along the fabric, turning them stiff like cardboard. I tried to adjust my grip and realized my fingers were starting to burn inside the gloves like the cold was eating through the material. Panic hit me. I dropped the disc into the sink bowl and yanked my hands back, tugging at the gloves. They didn't come off easily. They stuck to my skin, frozen stiff. I pulled harder, ripping the gloves, and finally got my hands free. My fingers were red and throbbing, like I'd almost gotten frostbite. The disc sat in the sink, humming softly, the little white light steady. Mist continued to crawl out of the cooler and across the floor. I stood there, panting, staring at the disc like it might decide to move again. That's when I heard my mom's voice from the hallway. "What on earth?" she said, sharp and shocked. My stomach dropped. I turned, and she was standing in my doorway, staring past me into the bathroom. Her eyes went wide, then angry, then confused, like her mind couldn't pick one reaction. "Your room," she said, voice rising. "What did you do?" I didn't know what to say. My throat went dry. My mind raced for a lie, but there was no lie big enough for what was happening. I found something," I blurted out. "On the path. I didn't know it would—" She pushed past me and looked into the bathroom. Fog spilled out into my bedroom like a spill you couldn't mop up. She flinched when it touched her bare legs. Her face hardened. "I want this cleaned up," she said, "right now. And you just wait until your father gets home." Then she stormed off down the hall, muttering to herself, like she could solve this by being angry at it. I stood there, shaking, listening to her footsteps fade, and then I walked back into my room. I stopped in the doorway because my room was no longer my room. Overnight, while I slept, it had turned into a frozen cave. Ice coated the walls in thick layers. The floor shimmered, slick and glassy like a skating rink. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, sharp and clear. Frost covered my posters, my bookshelf, my bed. Even the air felt different, colder, heavier, like breathing inside a freezer. My breath puffed out in white clouds. The disc in the sink glowed softly, like it was proud of what it had done. And somewhere deep under the hum, like a second sound hiding beneath the first, I thought I heard something else. A faint whisper, too soft to understand, like the room was trying to speak. I stood there long enough that my legs started to ache, the cold creeping up through the soles of my feet. The bathroom tile was so cold it hurt to stand on, like the floor itself was trying to push me away. My room didn't look damaged the way something broken looks. It looked transformed, like it had always been meant to be this way, and I was the one who didn't belong anymore. I took one careful step forward. The ice didn't crack. It didn't shift. It held my weight perfectly, smooth and solid. That scared me more than if it had broken. This wasn't fragile. It wasn't temporary. The disc hummed again, slightly louder, and the light at its center brightened just a little, like it noticed me moving. The whispering sound grew clearer, still not words, but closer to them. It reminded me of when you hear people talking in another room through a wall, the sounds blending together into something almost understandable. I backed out of the doorway and shut my bedroom door slowly. The wood felt brittle under my hand, cold like metal. When the door clicked closed, the whispering dulled, but didn't stop. It seeped through the doorframe, through the walls, through my head. I went downstairs, my teeth chattering, and wrapped myself in a blanket on the couch. My mom was in the kitchen on the phone, her voice tight and fast. I couldn't hear who she was talking to, but I caught words like freezer, gas leak, and something's wrong with the house. She didn't look at me. That hurt almost as much as the fear. I sat there for hours, staring at nothing, listening to the hum that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The house felt colder by the minute. The heater kicked on and off, struggling, the vents blowing air that felt weak and useless. By the time my dad came home, the living room windows were frosted over from the inside. He tried to be calm at first. He always did. He walked through the house, touching walls, opening vents, muttering to himself. When he opened my bedroom door, he froze in the doorway, his mouth hanging open. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I just found it." He looked at me then, really looked at me, like he was trying to decide whether I was lying or losing my mind. Then he closed the door carefully and went to the garage. He came back with gloves, goggles, and a hammer. "I'm getting rid of it," he said, "whatever it is." I followed him upstairs, begging him to be careful, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. He pulled the gloves on and wrapped a towel around his face, like a mask. When he opened the bathroom door, a fresh wave of fog rolled out, thicker than before. It poured down the stairs like it wanted to escape. The disc sat in the sink, humming steadily now. The light at its center pulsed once when my dad stepped closer. He raised the hammer. The moment the hammer hit the disc, the sound was wrong. It wasn't a crack or a clang. It was a dull, deep thud, like hitting frozen meat. The hammer bounced back slightly, and my dad staggered as if he'd been pushed. The humming spiked, turning sharp and loud. The whispering surged, overlapping, layering over itself, until it sounded like dozens of voices all trying to speak at once. The fog exploded out of the bathroom, blasting past us in a freezing wave. My dad dropped the hammer and clutched his head. "Make it stop," he groaned. "Jesus, make it stop." The walls shuddered. Ice spread across the hallway ceiling in branching patterns, racing outward like veins. The temperature plummeted so fast my breath caught painfully in my chest. The house groaned, wood cracking, pipes screaming somewhere deep inside the walls. The disc lifted out of the sink on its own. It rose slowly, steady and smooth, hovering at chest height. The light at its center flared bright enough to hurt my eyes. The whispering resolved into something closer to language, still distorted but more focused, like it had found a channel. Not words exactly, intent. My dad fell to his knees, gasping, frost forming in his hair and eyebrows. I screamed his name and tried to run to him, but my feet slid out from under me. The floor had frozen solid, slick as glass. I slammed into the wall and slid down, the cold biting through my clothes. The disc drifted toward the hallway, toward my bedroom. As it moved, the ice followed. My door burst open with a sharp crack. The frozen cave inside glowed brighter as the disc floated in, like it was returning home. The whispering grew louder, filling the house, pressing into my ears, my chest, my thoughts. I don't know how I knew what it wanted. I just did. It wasn't trying to hurt us, not on purpose. It was responding, expanding, doing what it was meant to do when it wasn't buried in dirt and leaves. My room wasn't wrong to it. The rest of the house was. I crawled toward the bathroom, my hands burning against the frozen floor, and grabbed the cooler. The plastic was stiff and cracking, but it still opened. I dragged it across the floor, leaving streaks of frost behind me. "Please," I shouted, not to my parents, not even to the thing itself. "Please, just go back." I didn't know if it understood. But when I shoved the cooler into my bedroom doorway, the disc paused. The whispering dipped like a breath being held. The light dimmed slightly. I crawled into my room, my teeth chattering so hard my jaw ached, and pushed the cooler underneath the disc. My hands were numb. My arms felt like they didn't belong to me anymore. With one last burst of strength, I slammed the lid shut. The humming cut off instantly. The whispering stopped. The cold didn't disappear right away, but it stopped spreading. The ice stayed where it was, thick and silent. My dad lay on the hallway floor, coughing, his breath coming back in ragged bursts. My mom cried downstairs, her voice thin and terrified. The house didn't thaw that day, or the next. It took weeks for the ice to retreat, inch by inch, leaving behind warped wood, cracked walls, and stains that never quite went away. Contractors blamed a freak electrical failure, a busted heater, bad insulation. Insurance argued, then paid out less than we needed. No one ever found the disc. The cooler sat in my room for months, locked, wrapped in blankets, humming softly sometimes when the house was quiet. Then one morning it was just gone. No hole, no frost, no trace. My parents never talked about it again. We moved the following year. I'm not 12 anymore. But sometimes when the air gets very cold and very still, I feel it again. That hum beneath everything. that sense of pressure like a room waiting to be filled. And I know, deep down, that whatever I found on that path wasn't broken, it was sleeping, and someday, somewhere else, someone is going to wake it up again. I tried to forget it. That sounds simple, but forgetting isn't something you do all at once. It happens in layers. First you stop talking about it. Then you stop thinking about it on purpose. Then you stop noticing how often it shows up in your dreams. And finally, you convince yourself that what remains is just a strange memory from childhood, warped by time and fear. For a while, that worked. We moved to a different town, then another, and new schools, new routines. My parents became quieter versions of themselves. My dad never went into the garage without a jacket again, even in summer. My mom kept the thermostats higher than necessary and checked it obsessively, like warmth itself might run out if she didn't watch it closely. As for me, I developed habits without realizing why. I hated cold rooms, not dislike hatred. If a classroom felt even a little chilly, I couldn't focus. My skin would prickle and my thoughts would scatter. I always sat near heaters. I slept with extra blankets. I avoided ice rinks, winter camps, anything that made my breath fog indoors. Doctors said I was anxious. Teachers said I was sensitive. My parents said nothing at all. Years passed. The memory dulled at the edges. The disc became something unreal, something that belonged to a different version of me. I went to college. I moved into apartments with bad heating systems and learned to live with them. I learned how to laugh when people joked about how dramatic I was about the cold. And then, one night, it came back. I was 27, living alone in a basement apartment that always smelled faintly of damp concrete. It was late, well past midnight, and I'd stayed up working. Outside, a cold snap had settled in, the kind that makes the city sound different, sharper, quieter. I was standing in my kitchen when I noticed my breath, just barely visible, a thin white puff that shouldn't have been there. I checked the thermostat. It read normal. The heater was running. The air felt fine on my skin, but the breath didn't lie. I exhaled again, slowly, white. My stomach tightened. That old hum began at the edge of my hearing, not loud, not obvious. The kind of sound you feel more than hear, like pressure behind your ears. I stood very still, afraid that if I moved too suddenly, something would respond. The kitchen light flickered, just once. I laughed, a short, nervous sound, and told myself this was nothing. Old buildings did this. Cold air sank. Anxiety filled in the gaps. I opened a cabinet, took out a mug, and poured myself hot water like I'd done 100 times before. The steam curled up beautifully, too beautifully. It didn't drift or fade the way steam should. It thickened, pooling above the mug, then slid downward instead of rising, spilling over the counter like fog. I dropped the mug. It shattered, ceramic exploding across the tile. The sound echoed too long, ringing in my ears. The hum deepened. Frost bloomed along the edges of the counter, racing outward in thin white veins. The air grew painfully cold in seconds, like someone had opened a door to winter itself inside my apartment. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The floor vibrated under my feet. I backed away, heart pounding, my mind screaming for logic, for reason, for anything that would tell me this wasn't happening again. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. No signal. The hum was stronger now, layered, complex, almost focused. The temperature kept dropping, breath fogging thickly with every gasp. I felt the old, awful recognition settle into my bones. It wasn't following me, it was responding. I stumbled into the bathroom and slammed the door, cranking the shower handle as far hot as it would go. Water blasted down, steam filling the room. For a moment the cold retreated, hissing softly like it was offended. Then the shower head froze solid. Ice crawled over the tiles, climbing the walls, sealing the door frame in a growing white crust. The light overhead flickered wildly, then steadied, casting a harsh glow over the forming ice. And in the center of the bathroom floor, the air warped. Not a solid shape, not yet, just a distortion, like heat shimmer turned inside out. The hum synchronized with my heartbeat, matching it beat for beat. I sank down against the wall, arms wrapped around myself, teeth chattering violently. "I put you back," I whispered. "I did what you wanted." The distortion pulsed, and for the first time since I was 12, I understood the truth I'd avoided. The disc hadn't been contained by the cooler. It had been learning heat, learning shelter, learning how people react when the cold comes from the wrong direction. The air in front of me condensed further, thickening, flattening, until something solid pressed itself into being. Smooth, dark, familiar. A flattened disc hovered inches above the tile. The light at its center flickered on. Not white this time, blue. Cold flooded the room so fast it stole the air from my lungs. The hum swelled into something almost musical, layered tones vibrating through my chest and skull. I didn't run, I couldn't. I just stared at it, the same way I had in the woods all those years ago, and felt that same terrible sense of responsibility settle over me. Like finding it meant something. Like waking it up meant I had a role to play. The disc drifted closer, and behind the hum, beneath the cold, I felt it again. That whisper, not language, expectation. The expectation pressed in on me until it felt physical, like hands against my chest holding me in place. My thoughts slowed, not because I was calming down, but because they were being crowded out by something heavier. The cold wasn't just around me anymore. It was inside me, sliding under my skin, settling into my bones the way fear does when it realizes it has all the time it needs. The disc hovered closer, so close I could see details I hadn't noticed before. The surface wasn't smooth the way metal is smooth. It was layered like countless thin sheets pressed together so tightly they looked like one. Faint lines rippled across it in slow patterns, not spinning, not pulsing, just shifting, as if the object was adjusting itself to the room. The blue light at its center dimmed and brightened in a steady rhythm, matching my breath. I tried to control it, to breathe slower, but the rhythm followed anyway, adapting instantly. That's when it hit me that this wasn't communication the way people think of it. There were no words, no images, no clear instructions. It didn't need them. It was synchronizing, finding alignment, learning me. The ice spread across the bathroom ceiling with a soft crackling sound, sealing the room in. The door was useless now, encased in frost thick enough to make it part of the wall. The only warmth left was trapped inside my chest, and even that felt like it was being measured, evaluated. I remembered something my dad used to say when I was a kid, usually when fixing something that didn't want to cooperate. He'd say machines aren't stubborn, they're just following rules you don't understand yet. The thought almost made me laugh. This wasn't stubborn, it was precise. The disc lowered until it was level with my face. The cold radiating from it burned my eyes, making them water. The hum shifted again, rising in pitch until it sat right at the edge of pain, then dropping suddenly into something so low I felt it more than heard it. The whisper sharpened, not into words, but into structure. I saw flashes then, not memories exactly, not visions, but impressions layered on top of each other, too fast to sort. Vast cold spaces, long periods of stillness, heat appearing briefly, violently, then vanishing again, movement followed by collapse, expansion followed by retreat. Cycles. This thing wasn't a visitor, it was a response. When enough heat gathered in one place, when movement became dense and sustained, it woke. It didn't hunt, it didn't search, it reacted the way ice forms around a disturbance in water. I understood then why it hadn't hurt us before, why my parents survived, why the house had thawed instead of shattering. It hadn't finished learning. Now it had. The pressure in my head intensified, and for a moment I thought I was going to pass out. Instead, the sensation shifted, sliding sideways into something like clarity. The fear didn't vanish, but it stopped being sharp. It became heavy, manageable, like a weight I could brace against. I realized distantly that I was being given a choice, not spoken, not offered, implied. The disc wasn't here to destroy my apartment. It could have done that already. It wasn't here to kill me. That would have been inefficient. It was here because I was familiar, because I had already adapted once as a child, because some part of me remembered how to respond. The expectation wasn't demand. It was invitation. My hands shook as I lowered them from where they were clenched against my chest. The air around my fingers fogged instantly. I could feel the cold reaching for me, waiting to see if I would pull back. I didn't. I leaned forward. The moment I did, the hum softened. The pressure eased just enough that I could breathe again. The disc tilted slightly like an animal cocking its head. The blue light dimmed, shifting toward white, then back again like it was recalibrating. I didn't touch it. I just stayed there, close enough to feel the cold, close enough to let it register me without letting it take me. I know, I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I meant. I remember. The whisper receded, slipping back into formlessness. The ice stopped spreading. The cracking sounds faded. The disc hovered in place for a long, quiet moment. Then it began to flatten, not deflate the way it had in the woods, but thin, compressing itself until it looked almost two-dimensional again. The light at its center dimmed until it was barely visible, a faint glow like an ember buried under ash. The cold retreated slowly, painfully. Ice melted in reluctant patches, dripping down the walls and pooling on the floor. The doorframe cracked as the frost loosened its grip. The hum faded into silence so complete it rang in my ears. The disc dropped gently to the tile and lay still, just an object again. I collapsed forward, hands slapping into cold water, my whole body shaking with delayed terror and exhaustion. I stayed there until the room felt normal again, until the air stopped biting and my breath stopped fogging. By the time I managed to stand, the bathroom looked like a disaster zone. Water everywhere, cracked tiles, meltwater dripping from the ceiling. But it was just damage, explainable damage. The disc was gone when I looked back down. No scorch mark, no frost, no indentation, nothing. I moved out 2 days later. I didn't pack much. I didn't argue with the landlord. I left most of my furniture behind and told myself, It was because I wanted a fresh start. The truth was simpler. I knew better than to settle somewhere it had already learned. I don't live alone anymore. I keep my places warm, busy, full of sound. I avoid basements, I avoid quiet. I avoid long stretches of stillness where the air feels too aware. But sometimes, late at night, when winter presses hard against the windows and the world goes quiet despite my efforts, I feel it again. Not the cold, the attention. And I understand now that it isn't following me. It's just very good at remembering. The years after that passed quietly on the surface. I finished school. I moved cities more than once. I learned how to make conversation about small things, work, weather, plans for the weekend, without letting my mind drift too far inward. From the outside, my life looks normal enough. Uneventful even. If you met me at a coffee shop or passed me in a grocery store, you would never guess there was anything unusual about me at all. That's the part that still unsettles me. Because whatever happened back then did not leave scars you can see. It didn't leave nightmares that wake me screaming or obvious gaps in my memory. What it left was subtler, quieter, like a rule learned so deeply that it no longer feels like a rule, just a way the world works. I learned to notice temperature changes before anyone else does. I'll be the first to mention a room feels cold even when the thermostat says otherwise. I can tell when metal has been outside in winter, just by looking at it. I know instinctively which patches of ground will frost over first and which ones will stay dark and wet. I don't tell people these things. I've learned how easily curiosity turns into concern, and how concern turns into questions I don't want to answer. Sometimes, though, curiosity gets the better of me. I've searched online for stories like mine, not the dramatic ones, not the ones filled with bright lights and medical tables and beings that speak in perfect sentences. I look for the small ones, the ones that end abruptly, the ones that sound embarrassed, uncertain, written by people who seem unsure whether they even believe themselves. A hiker who found something cold and flat on a trail and lost time afterward. A child whose bedroom froze overnight without explanation. A family whose pipes burst in summer during a heat wave. Ice forming where it shouldn't have been possible. Most of these posts disappear. Deleted by moderators, removed by the authors, laughed off in comments until the person stops replying. But every so often there's a pattern. Always the cold first. Always the silence, always the sense of being noticed rather than attacked. I never reach out to them. I don't warn anyone. I don't try to connect the dots publicly. That feels dangerous in a way I can't fully explain, like drawing attention to something that prefers to stay unnamed, because I understand now that it doesn't act unless conditions are right. Heat, density, stillness, long enough together and it wakes. There's a reason cities don't freeze the way isolated places do. Too much movement, too much noise, too many overlapping systems. Whatever it is, it doesn't thrive on chaos. It stabilizes it. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to that moment in the bathroom, standing barefoot on ice with my breath fogging the air. I remember the clarity that came with the fear, the strange certainty that settled in me when the pressure eased. I wasn't chosen because I was special. I was chosen because I was adaptable. That knowledge sits with me now, heavy but calm. I've built my life around it without ever fully admitting it to myself. I keep routines. I keep warmth. I keep people close, not out of loneliness, but out of instinct. And I watch. Not constantly, not obsessively, just enough. Because I know something most people don't, and I suspect I always will. There are things in this universe that don't care about us as individuals. They don't hate, they don't love, they don't judge. They regulate. And once they learn you, once they understand how you fit into their rules, they don't forget. They simply wait. I don't know what would happen if it ever came back. That's the question people always ask in their own way, even if they don't realize it. What would you do? Would you run? Would you fight? Would you tell someone? The truth is, I already know the answer, and it scares me more than anything else. I wouldn't do any of those things, because part of me understands it now in a way that feels too natural, too practiced. I understand that running only creates heat. Panic accelerates everything. Resistance introduces friction, and friction invites response. The worst thing you can do is react the way a frightened animal does. That's how it finds you. There are moments when I catch myself slipping into that old mindset without meaning to. When the power goes out during a winter storm and the house grows too quiet. When the heater clicks off and doesn't come back on right away. When the air feels dense, heavy, like it's waiting for permission to move. In those moments, I don't reach for my phone. I don't shout. I don't pace. I sit still. I slow my breathing. I let the cold exist without feeding it. And every time the feeling passes, I've tried to tell myself this is just trauma, a childhood experience that rewired my sense of danger. Therapists would probably agree. They'd say my brain learned a pattern and refuses to let it go. That hyper-awareness is a common side effect of fear mixed with imagination. Maybe they're right. But trauma doesn't explain the dreams. They're not nightmares, that's the strange part. There's no fear in them, no urgency, just vastness, open spaces that stretch beyond sight, layered with quiet movement, structures forming and dissolving slowly, patiently. I never see myself in these dreams, never see a body or a face. I'm just present, observing. Sometimes I wake up with the certainty that something has shifted somewhere far away. A storm forming, a system correcting itself, a balance being restored. I'll check the news later and find reports of unexplained weather events. Sudden cold snaps, flash freezes that leave meteorologists scrambling for explanations that don't quite fit. Coincidences, I tell myself, they have to be. But there's one thing I've never been able to explain away. Last winter I was visiting a friend in a rural area, far from the city. The power went out during the night, and the house cooled faster than it should have. I woke up before anyone else, alert for no clear reason, and felt that familiar weight settle into the air. Not fear, attention. I stood quietly in the hallway, barefoot on cold wood, listening to the house creak as it adjusted to the temperature change. The windows were opaque with frost, even though it hadn't been that cold when we went to bed. Then I felt it, not near me, not inside the house, outside, farther away, in the open field behind the property, where nothing moved and no one ever went after dark. I didn't wake anyone. I didn't look out the window. I just stood there, breathing slowly, offering nothing. After a long while, the pressure eased. The house warmed again once the generator kicked on. The frost melted. Morning came like it always does, ordinary and harmless. My friend complained about the cold over breakfast, laughed it off. I smiled and nodded and said nothing. because I knew then, with a clarity that left no room for denial, that it wasn't following me specifically. It was expanding its understanding, learning new environments, new conditions, new balances. And once you recognize that, once you accept that some forces don't need intent to be dangerous, you stop thinking in terms of monsters and start thinking in terms of systems, weather systems, geological systems, ecological systems, correction mechanisms. I sometimes wonder if one day it won't need intermediaries like me anymore. If it will learn to regulate without adaptation, without testing the edges through people who notice before others do. Maybe that's already happening. Maybe the only reason I'm still here, still aware, is because I was part of an early lesson, a crude experiment before refinement. That thought brings a strange kind of comfort, because if I was just a step in a process, then there's nothing personal about it. No grudge, no unfinished business, just a memory. And memories, I've learned, don't have to come back to hurt you. They just exist, waiting. I try not to think about what happens when memories stop being passive. That's the line I don't cross in my thoughts, the one I circle but never step over. Because once you start asking what a thing might want, you begin giving it a shape it doesn't need. Intent is a human habit. Meaning is something we project so we can sleep at night. Still, there are days when the boundary feels thin. It happens most often in winter when the air turns sharp and clean and sound doesn't travel the way it should. On those days, I catch myself pausing mid-step, listening not for noise but for absence, for the way silence sometimes deepens, as if it's being layered carefully, deliberately. I've learned to recognize the difference between quiet and preparation. Once, not long ago, I was walking home after sunset, when the temperature dropped faster than expected. The streetlights flickered, then steadied. Cars passed, people talked. Life moved on exactly as it should have. And yet, beneath it all, I felt the hum, not audible, not physical, structural. I stopped walking without meaning to. My breath fogged in the air, and I watched the vapor linger longer than it should have before dissolving. The cold felt clean, purposeful, like it was settling into place rather than spreading randomly. For just a moment, I thought I felt something recognize me again, not with interest, with familiarity. The way a system acknowledges a known variable and moves past it. The hum faded. The air loosened. I started walking again, heart pounding only after it was already over. No one around me noticed anything unusual. Why would they? Nothing had happened. That's the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Nothing has to happen. There are no invasions, no announcements, no dramatic returns. Whatever this thing is, whatever force learned me all those years ago, it doesn't need spectacle. It works quietly, patiently, adjusting the world one subtle correction at a time. And maybe that's always been the case. Maybe there have always been people like me, children who adapt instead of breaking, who learn the rules without ever being taught, who survive not because they fight, but because they understand when not to. I don't think we're chosen, I think we're noticed. Sometimes late at night, I wonder what would happen if I stopped paying attention, if I let myself forget the way cold moves, the way silence gathers weight, if I lived like everyone else, careless and loud, and certain that nothing unseen is watching the margins. But then I remember how quickly systems compensate for neglect, how nature corrects imbalances without apology, how ice forms first where the ground is already weak, so I stay aware, not afraid, not obsessed, just ready. Because if there's one thing I learned from that night, from the disk and the cold and the pressure that reshaped my understanding of the world, it's this. Some forces don't come back for revenge. They come back for calibration. And when they do, they don't need to announce themselves. They'll simply adjust the temperature, still the air, and wait to see who notices first. And whoever does will already know what to do. I used to think noticing was the same thing as understanding. It isn't. Understanding implies control, or at least the illusion of it. Noticing is humbler. It's acceptance without mastery. It's recognizing patterns without believing you can stop them. That difference matters more than I ever expected. Years passed without anything dramatic happening. No frozen rooms, no hovering lights, no pressure heavy enough to stop my breath. Life filled in the gaps the way it always does. Jobs, relationships, small disappointments, quiet victories. The memory of the disc faded at the edges, not because it lost its power, but because I learned how to carry it without letting it spill into everything else. I almost convinced myself it was over. Then came the winter when the reports started lining up too neatly to ignore. A research station in the far north went silent after recording a sudden, localized temperature collapse that froze equipment mid-operation. A rural town woke to find a stretch of land flash frozen in a perfect circle, the surrounding area untouched. A cargo ship reported ice forming on deck in open water, where temperatures should have made it impossible. Each incident was explained away. Instrument error, rare atmospheric conditions, unlikely coincidences stacked on top of each other. I read the articles late at night, my screen glowing softly in a warm room, and felt that old, familiar calm settle into my chest. Not fear, recognition. What unsettled me most wasn't that it was happening again. It was that it was happening without me. For the first time, I wondered if my role had ended, if the system had learned enough to operate independently, that I was no longer a variable worth referencing. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it left me uneasy. Because if it no longer needed intermediaries, if it no longer required adaptation through observation, then whatever came next would be cleaner, faster, less forgiving. One night, during a particularly brutal cold snap, I dreamed again. This time, the dream was different. There were no vast spaces, no abstract impressions. I was standing somewhere familiar, though I couldn't place it at first. Flat ground stretched out in every direction, covered in frost that glittered faintly under a dim, colorless sky. Then I realized where I was. It was the path where I had first found the disc as a child. Everything was unchanged. The trees stood exactly as they had that day. The brush still crowded the edges. Even the curve of the trail was the same. In the center of the path lay the disc, flat, still, waiting. I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't a memory. It wasn't a reconstruction. It was a reference point being revisited. I didn't approach it. I didn't need to. The disc began to glow on its own, the light softer than before, almost gentle. The cold around it deepened, but it didn't spread. It held its place, precise and contained. Then I felt it again. Not attention this time, acknowledgement. The dream ended without drama, no fear, no urgency. Just the sense of something closing a loop. When I woke, the room was warm. The world outside was ordinary. The news that morning reported another unexplained freeze, this one overseas, far from anywhere I had ever been. I understood then that my presence was no longer required. I hadn't been a guardian or a warning. I had been a calibration point, a way for something vast and indifferent to learn how humans respond to sudden correction. It learned patience from me. It learned restraint. It learned that some systems break when pushed too hard, too fast. If I had panicked back then, if I had screamed, resisted, tried to destroy it, maybe things would be very different now, maybe harsher. That realization sits with me in a way nothing else ever has. Because it means survival isn't always about strength or courage. Sometimes it's about how quietly you accept what's happening long enough for it to pass. I don't tell this story to warn people. Warnings assume choice. Most people will never notice the signs, and that's probably for the best. The world functions more smoothly when most of its inhabitants remain unaware of the mechanisms balancing it. But if you ever find yourself somewhere very still, and the cold settles in too quickly, and the air feels measured rather than empty, remember this: don't react, don't demand answers, don't try to name what you're experiencing. Just breathe, stay calm, let the moment register you as stable. Because if something is watching, it isn't deciding whether to hurt you. It's deciding whether you're worth adjusting around. And once that decision is made, once it understands you well enough to move past you, it will leave no sign it was ever there at all. Except perhaps a memory, and the quiet knowledge that the world is being kept in balance by things that don't need us to believe in them to do their work. I don't know why I'm writing this now. Maybe it's because time has finally put enough distance between me and that first encounter that I can look at it without flinching. Or maybe it's because distance no longer feels like protection. The older I get, the more I realize that what mattered wasn't where it happened, or even what it was, but how quietly it fit itself into the shape of my life afterward. There are moments when I catch my reflection in a window late at night and wonder what it sees when it looks back at me. Not my face, not my age, but my stillness. The way I pause before reacting, the way I listen before speaking, the way I instinctively reduce myself when a room feels too tense, too compressed, too cold in ways that have nothing to do with temperature. People call that maturity. They call it patience. They call it emotional intelligence. They have no idea how literal those words are. I've never seen the disc again in waking life, not physically, but sometimes when I close my eyes in a quiet room, I can still picture it perfectly. The flatness, the layered surface, the way it never truly reflected light, only absorbed and redistributed it. It exists in my memory with more clarity than faces I've loved, places I've lived, or events that should matter more. That alone tells me something. Memories fade when they're finished with you. This one hasn't. Every winter I notice small changes that other people miss. Patterns in frost, windows icing in places that don't make sense. The way snow sometimes falls straight down in one isolated patch, while wind tears through everything around it. These moments are brief, easy to dismiss, but they line up too well, too consistently to be random. Still, I don't investigate. I don't chase confirmation. I learned a long time ago that attention is a form of energy, and energy is exactly what some systems respond to. So I live quietly, I keep heat in my home. I keep movement in my days. I keep noise at a comfortable level. I don't seek isolation, but I don't fear it either. I exist in balance because balance is what I was taught without ever being told. And sometimes, when the night is especially still and the air feels too clean, I get the sense that something is passing nearby, not stopping, not checking, just moving through, confident and efficient, like a tide following rules older than fear. In those moments, I don't feel small. I feel accounted for, as if somewhere far beyond my understanding, a system registers me as stable, non-disruptive, no longer requiring adjustment. That knowledge doesn't bring comfort exactly, but it brings certainty. And certainty, I've learned, is far more valuable than reassurance. If you're reading this and wondering whether you should be afraid, the answer is probably no. Fear is loud. What I encountered was not. It was quiet, deliberate, and deeply uninterested in drama. Just remember this, if nothing else, not everything that changes the world does so with violence. Not everything that watches is waiting to attack. And not every encounter leaves you broken. Some leave you calibrated, and once that happens, the world never quite feels random again. I stopped writing after that, not because there was nothing left to say, but because some stories aren't meant to be extended forever. They don't build toward a final reveal or a last scare. They end the way systems do when equilibrium is reached. I still notice things. That hasn't changed. A sudden hush before a storm breaks. A cold pocket in a room that shouldn't have one. The way silence sometimes gathers weight, like it's being measured instead of ignored. But I don't assign meaning to every moment anymore. I don't assume every anomaly is a message. That was another lesson I learned late. Not everything that feels significant is directed at you. Sometimes it's just the world adjusting itself, correcting tiny imbalances most people will never sense. Sometimes you're close enough to feel the shift, but not important enough to be involved. And that's fine. I've come to understand that whatever found me back then didn't change my life out of curiosity or malice. It didn't choose me because I mattered. It chose me because I didn't interfere. I adapted. I stabilized. I didn't break. That was enough. If there is a warning in all of this, it isn't about strange objects or impossible cold or unseen forces moving through the margins of reality. It's simpler than that. The world is not chaotic in the way we like to believe. It is regulated by layers of systems we barely comprehend. And occasionally, someone becomes aware of one by accident. Awareness doesn't make you powerful. It makes you quiet. So if you ever find yourself somewhere still, somewhere cold, and the air feels heavy in a way that has nothing to do with weather, don't panic. Don't reach for explanations that make you feel important or targeted. Just ask yourself one question: am I making this worse? If the answer is no, then you'll probably be fine. And if the answer is yes, well, some systems don't correct gently. They just correct. And they don't need to remember your name to do it. Story 2. Milton did his rounds the same way every morning, moving through the old building with a clipboard tucked under one arm, a notebook in his back pocket, and a sharp number 2 pencil he kept checking like it might go dull if he blinked too long. A stethoscope hung around his neck, bouncing lightly against his chest as he walked. It made him look official, or at least close enough that most people didn't question him. The place had a proper name on paper, but almost nobody used it. Staff called it the facility. Families called it a hospital. The residents called it comfort house, half like a joke and half like a prayer. In older times, people would have said asylum and meant it in the original sense. Shelter, a place away from the world. Now it meant something else. Locked doors, med carts, timetables, the dull hiss of fluorescent lights. The feeling that time moved differently inside these walls, thicker and slower like syrup. Comfort House sat far enough from town that the outside world felt unreal. The roads were long and empty. The phone signal was weak. The building itself seemed to crouch in the landscape, as if it had been built low on purpose, trying not to be noticed by anything passing by. Inside, there were long corridors with scuffed linoleum and paint that had been touched up so many times you could see the layers. It smelled like disinfectant, warmed plastic, and old coffee. Milton liked the quiet that lived here, even when it wasn't quiet. He liked the rules, the patterns, the way each day was shaped into predictable pieces. Breakfast, meds, group, recreation, dinner, lights out. The structure kept people steady. It helped. It didn't cure everything, but it gave the mind something to hold on to when thoughts became too loud or too fast. The staff focused on safety and stability. They weren't preaching. They weren't trying to push beliefs. They were trying to keep people grounded, fed, rested, and as calm as possible. In the recreation hall, a quote was posted high on the wall in big, simple lettering. It was from Martin Luther King Jr. Every person must decide at some point whether they will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. People passed under it every day. Some never looked up. Some stared at it like it was a riddle they couldn't solve. Milton read it every time he walked into that room, and he always felt like it was meant for him. He moved through the hall with a gentle presence, careful with his voice and his body language. He knew which residents needed space and which needed reassurance. He knew who got startled by sudden movements, who didn't like eye contact, who hated being touched, who needed you to speak slowly, who needed you to speak like everything was normal, even when it wasn't. In a place like this, little things mattered. A wrong tone could turn a calm moment into a storm. Medication was part of the routine. Not because people were weak, but because some brains were battling things most folks never had to face. Fear that came out of nowhere, thoughts that wouldn't stop, memories that attacked in the middle of the night, and voices that felt as real as any person in the room. The meds didn't erase who someone was. For many residents, they made it possible to sleep, to eat, to sit through a conversation without getting pulled under by panic or noise. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always kind, but it kept the worst days from becoming constant. Milton made his rounds without an office, without a badge that meant anything, and without anyone officially asking him to. He had started doing it on his own. At first, the staff tried to stop him. Then they noticed something strange. The residents listened to him. They trusted him in a way they didn't always trust the real clinicians. Milton didn't talk down to them. He didn't mock what they said. He met them where they were, even if where they were didn't make sense to anyone else. The staff eventually made a quiet deal. Milton could play doctor as long as he stayed in common areas, didn't touch medical equipment besides his fake stethoscope, and turned in his notes at the end of the day. They treated it like a harmless coping method, a routine, a way for him to feel useful. Nobody talked about the fact that Milton was a resident too. He started with Harold, a thin man who sat with his shoulders curled inward, like he was trying to make himself smaller than the chair. Harold's eyes rarely met anyone's. He made sounds sometimes, quick, rough noises that escaped his throat before he could stop them, like hiccups mixed with coughs. Other residents had given him a nickname that followed him everywhere, Noise Boy. Even some of the staff used it without thinking, which always bothered Milton. Milton pulled a chair in front of him, close enough to be present but not so close that it felt like a trap. "How are you today?" Milton asked. Harold's fingers twisted around each other near his chest, rubbing skin on skin like he was trying to wipe something off. "Better today," he said, then repeated it, softer. "Better today." Milton nodded as if that was the most normal thing in the world. "What happened yesterday?" Harold swallowed. The muscles in his throat moved like he was forcing down something heavy. "Yesterday I saw them." Milton's pencil hovered over the page. Was it the shadow people? Harold's head dipped, a small jerking movement. "Yes, they made me feel like my time is short." The phrase hit the air and stayed there. "My time is short." Harold went still after saying it, like he had stepped too close to an edge. Milton took a breath and chose his words carefully. "Time feels short when you're scared," he said, "and sometimes fear makes the future feel like it's rushing toward you, but time is short for everyone in one way or another. That doesn't mean something bad is about to happen to you today. It means we need to use today well. It means we stay in the present." Harold's eyes lifted for a second. There was something hopeful in them, something that looked like a child waiting for an adult to say the right thing. Milton leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "If the shadow people come back, I want you to do two things. First, breathe slow. Second, name what you can see in the room. The chair, the window, the floor, me. Those are real. The shadows are thoughts trying to pretend they're real." Harold blinked and his hands loosened a little. "Better," he said again, like he was testing the word. Milton gave him a soft pat on the shoulder, a quick touch meant to be grounding, not invasive. "All better now?" "Yes," Harold answered. Then he looked away again, drifting back into his own private world, like someone slipping behind a curtain. Milton moved on. At a table near the windows sat Margaret, a small older woman in a wheelchair, with hair as thin and pale as spider silk. Under the bright lights, her head almost seemed to glow. Her hands worked fast, knitting something with intense focus. The motion of the needles was smooth and practiced, like her body remembered the skill even when her mind got lost. "Margaret," Milton said with warmth, pulling up a chair across from her. "How are we today?" Her eyes snapped to his hands. In one quick movement, she yanked her knitting off the table and clutched it to her chest like he was about to steal it. "Mine," she said. Milton held both palms up, calm, open. "I'm not here to take anything from you. I know it's yours." Margaret watched his face, her suspicion thick as fog. Then her mouth twitched into a small, pleased smile. She set the knitting back down slowly, still ready to snatch it again if she had to. For Milton, that alone was progress. Yesterday she wouldn't have let the piece leave her body. She'd held it like a life raft. The knitting was her anchor, the one thing she could control, in a place that controlled everything else. Margaret nudged the fabric toward him with a careful hand. "Would you like to touch it?" Milton's pencil moved as he wrote down the moment. He didn't reach for the knitting. Something told him not to, not because it would harm him, but because Margaret's trust was fragile. He didn't want to push. "It's okay," he said. "I think it's important you finish it first. Keep it yours until it's complete. When you're done, you can show it to everyone." Margaret considered this, her eyes narrowing like she was judging him. "Do you know what it's going to be?" Milton looked at the half-formed shape. He couldn't tell what it was supposed to become. It could have been anything. A dress, he guessed, gentle and hopeful, trying to make her feel seen. For a split second, her face darkened, like a storm was passing over the sun. Then she smiled in a way that made Milton uneasy. "Heavens, man," she said, "and you call yourself a doctor." She muttered something under her breath. Maybe amateur, maybe something else. "It's going to be a medical robe," she said, "for protection against the nightmares." Milton paused. Nightmares. Margaret's hands slowed, but they didn't stop. "It's like being trapped inside one," she said. "Like I wake up, but I can't move. Like something sits on me and breathes on my face. I'm too old to fight with it. I'm losing sleep to it." Milton wrote quickly, not because he doubted her, but because he wanted the staff to know. "Have you told the nurses? Have they tried anything for sleep?" "They gave me something," Margaret said with disgust. "It made my skin crawl. It made me walk in my sleep. It made everything worse. If that thing comes again, I need to be awake. It likes me." Milton felt a chill at the way she said it. "It likes me." He kept his expression neutral. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "Something that helps, without making you feel trapped." Margaret nodded, satisfied, and returned to knitting like the conversation had never happened. Milton stood up, ready to move to the next person, when the room snapped. It started as a ripple, chairs scraping, a shout, a sudden burst of laughter too loud for the space. Then glass broke. The sound cracked through the hall like a gunshot, and the calm routine of Comfort House collapsed into chaos in seconds. People screamed. Some residents ran, others froze. A few began talking fast, their words piling on top of each other. The noise rose in waves, bouncing off the walls, turning the room into a living thing. Milton pushed through the movement and saw Lewis. Lewis stood near a table with a long shard of broken glass in his hand. Blood ran down his forearm and dripped onto the floor. His eyes were wide and wild, his chest heaving as if he'd sprinted a mile. 2 young security guards had arrived, but they stopped short, unsure, afraid to make the wrong move. "Don't you hear them?" Lewis shouted. One guard tried to step closer, and Lewis bared his teeth like an animal. "Come any closer and I'll cut your heads off." Behind the guards, 2 nurses hovered, tense and ready but uncertain. They had just come out of a 3-week lockdown not long ago after a similar incident. Everyone could feel it. If this went wrong, the whole unit could spiral again. As if the room needed one more spark, an elderly resident everyone called Brownie began playing the piano. Her fingers hit the keys with a cheerful certainty, and she launched into "She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain" like she was performing in a bright school auditorium instead of a room full of fear. The song, meant to be light, made things worse. It grabbed at people's nerves. It pulled laughter out of some residents and rage out of others. Brownie grinned, delighted by the attention, unaware that she was pouring fuel on a fire. Milton scanned the scene and understood immediately. Those security guards didn't know how to handle this. They were kids, barely older than some of the residents' worst memories. They looked trapped between training manuals and raw panic. Milton stepped forward. He didn't do it because he was brave. He did it because he knew Lewis. Lewis wasn't a monster in Milton's mind. Lewis was a man whose brain had cracks in it, and sometimes terrible things spilled out. On good days, Lewis could talk. He could listen. On bad days, he became a storm that couldn't see the damage it caused until it was too late. Milton raised his hands and spoke in a calm voice that cut through the chaos like a steady line. "I hear them too, Lewis," Milton said. Lewis blinked, stunned. The shard of glass lowered by a fraction. "You do?" "They exist," Milton continued, choosing each word with care. "Maybe not in the way you think, but I know what it's like when something won't stop talking in your head. Are they telling you to hurt anyone?" Lewis's face twitched. The anger didn't vanish, but something shifted, like a door had opened just a crack. He dragged a hand through his hair, smearing blood into his bangs. "What are the voices saying to you?" Lewis asked. His voice was rough, suspicious but curious. Milton's heart thudded hard. He wasn't hearing voices. If he answered wrong, Lewis could snap back into violence. Milton forced himself to stay steady. "They told me they made a mistake," he said. Lewis frowned, as if that possibility had never occurred to him. "A mistake?" "Yes," Milton said, leaning into the idea. "Like they got the wrong person. Like they're trying to scare you, but they don't have the right." Lewis's breathing changed. The shard trembled in his hand. "They're in my ears," he groaned. "It hurts. Tell them to stop." "What are they telling you, Lewis?" Milton asked again, softer now, like he was trying to coax an animal out of a trap. Lewis paced back and forth, the glass flashing under the lights. "My head!" he shouted. "My head!" Milton kept his voice low. "What are they telling you?" Lewis's shoulders rose and fell like waves. Then he said it, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "They're telling me to take as many people with me as I can." Milton felt cold spread through his chest. "Take them where?" Lewis's eyes flicked toward the windows, toward the doors, toward the outside world. "Out there," he said, and his voice carried a strange certainty, like he was repeating a command. "With me. Out there." Milton stepped closer, not too fast, not too slow. "Lewis, listen," he said. "You're safe in here. Out there is not safe. Out there is cold and sharp and full of things that don't care if you're scared. In here, people care. In here, you can be helped." Lewis's lips moved silently, like he was arguing with something nobody else could hear. Then his shoulders sagged. "Happiness," he whispered, as if he'd forgotten the word existed. "Yes, happiness." His hand lowered. He placed the shard of glass on the table. The security guards moved in quickly, finally brave enough now that the danger had softened. Nurses and a doctor joined them. Lewis was guided out, still shaking, still pale, but no longer swinging the glass like a weapon. The room exhaled in broken pieces, sobs, shaky laughs, people muttering prayers or insults or nonsense. Milton stood there, still holding his pencil, as if writing something down could make the moment less real. A small voice spoke beside him. That was a close one. Milton turned and saw Gary, a thin, balding man with sharp cheekbones and eyes that always looked a little too bright. "Gary," Milton said, forcing himself back into routine. "You're next. Do you have a minute?" Gary looked excited, like he'd been waiting all day for Milton to notice him. "Not just a minute," he said quickly. "Something happened last night. Something huge." Milton sat with him, the way he always did, and wrote Gary at the top of the page in big letters. He asked about the angels Gary often mentioned, the ones Gary claimed visited him at night. Gary leaned forward, lips pursed as he spoke. "Not just angels. Listen, this has to do with the church. A man could be kicked out for what I'm about to say." Milton tried to smile. "You can tell me." Gary launched into it with urgency, talking about Judas, about the Last Supper, about how people misunderstood betrayal and evil. He spoke like a man giving a sermon, building his point higher and higher, convinced he'd found a hidden truth that would change everything. Milton listened, nodding in the right places, asking careful questions, letting Gary feel heard. Whether the ideas were accurate didn't matter as much as what they meant to Gary. A sense of order, a sense of meaning, a feeling that even darkness had a purpose. Milton's pencil snapped while Gary spoke, the graphite breaking with a tiny crack. Milton excused himself, found a sharpener, fixed the point, and returned. Gary kept talking like he hadn't taken a breath the whole time. When Gary finally slowed, Milton thanked him. "We'll talk more tomorrow," Milton promised. "I have to finish my rounds." That was when Milton went to find Jim Morrow. Jim was the kind of resident staff watched carefully. He was big, heavy in the shoulders, with a thick neck and a habit of rocking back and forth in front of the television. He didn't care what was on. He didn't change channels. He didn't let anyone else touch the remote. It was like the screen was a barrier between him and the rest of the world, and he needed it there. Milton sat beside him at a cautious distance. "Jim," he said. "How are you today?" Jim grunted. "Anything on your mind?" Milton asked, keeping his tone even. For once, Jim answered. "The pills," he said. "They don't keep us alive. They're killing us." Milton's stomach tightened. Jim wasn't the type to say things for attention. If Jim spoke, it mattered. "That's not good to hear," Milton said. "Yesterday I thought we were making progress." "Yesterday is yesterday," Jim said flatly. "I'm talking about now." Milton studied Jim's face, looking for the line Jim sometimes crossed when he became dangerous. But something was different. The usual anger wasn't burning. Instead, Jim looked tired, worn down, like someone had taken a knife to the inside of him and left him hollow. "What changed?" Milton asked, surprised by his own courage. Jim stopped rocking for a moment. He looked down at his hands. When he pulled them from his pockets, Milton saw stains on his skin, dark, dried marks that could only be one thing. Milton stood up fast, instincts taking over. "Jim," he said, voice tight. "What did you do?" Jim's eyes lifted, and for the first time in a long time, Milton saw fear there. Not anger, fear. "Night terrors," Jim said. "A black thing, a hag, cold hands. I'm not just cursed, I'm damned." Milton forced himself to breathe. "Tell me what happened." Jim's voice shook, but he spoke. He blamed the darkness. He blamed something watching him. He used the name people always used for fear when they couldn't explain it. Slender Man. Milton didn't care about the label, he cared about the facts. Who? Milton asked. Where? Jim swallowed hard. Nancy, he said. Nurse Nancy. Milton's heart dropped. Nancy was kind. Nancy was new. Nancy had a baby at home. Jim's voice went thin. She's under my bed. Milton felt sick, but he didn't shout. He didn't run. He didn't treat Jim like a circus monster. He did what he always did. He treated him like a person who had done something terrible and who was now trapped inside the reality of it. Show me, Milton said. Jim stood and walked, slow and obedient, down the hall. At his door, Milton lifted a hand. Stay out here. Jim stayed. He didn't argue. Whatever fight he usually carried had drained away, like something had scraped it out of him. Milton opened the door and stepped inside. He didn't go far. He didn't need to. The room told the story without words. It was a crime scene in the most obvious sense. Blood where it shouldn't be. Chaos where there should have been routine. Milton's eyes found what Jim had said was there, and his mind tried to reject it. He backed out immediately, careful not to step into anything. He looked down at his shoes, checking as if that mattered now. He faced Jim in the hallway and kept his voice calm because if he didn't, he knew he would break. Jim, he said, you crossed a line. Jim's mouth moved. No one is immortal, he said, almost like a quote he'd heard somewhere. Milton swallowed. Where is her head? The words sounded unreal as they left his mouth, like he was reading from a script written by someone else. Jim blinked, confused, and shook his head. Her head? That wasn't me. Milton stared at him, trying to understand. The horror wasn't just the murder. It was the detail that didn't fit, the part that made the situation feel wrong in a way that was bigger than Jim. Jim was capable of violence, yes, but he didn't look proud. He didn't look satisfied. He looked like a man who had woken up inside someone else's nightmare. Milton did what he had to do. He went to the main nurse's station and reported what Jim had said and what he had seen. His heart hammered like it was trying to escape his chest. He felt guilty for things he hadn't done because that's what shock did. It spread blame like fog. An investigation began. Police came. Administrators came. Everyone asked questions. Milton handed over his notebook. The staff took his stethoscope away and told him he couldn't do rounds anymore, not for a while. It wasn't punishment, not exactly. It was control. It was them trying to hold the building steady after something horrific had happened inside it. And that's when the truth surfaced. Not like a dramatic confession, but like a quiet file pulled from a cabinet and set on a desk. Milton wasn't staff. Milton was one of them. He was a resident who made his rounds every day, pretending to be a doctor because pretending gave him purpose. The residents didn't mind. Some staff even found it helpful. But now, after a murder, after panic and blood and missing pieces that didn't add up, the administration couldn't ignore the risk of letting a resident wander the facility with authority he didn't actually have. Milton was put back on his regular medication. His days returned to the normal schedule, the one he'd been living inside even while pretending he was above it. For a few weeks, he wasn't allowed a pencil, a notebook, or anything sharp. He hated that more than he could explain. Writing was how he kept the noise in his head from swallowing him whole. Eventually, when things settled, they gave him a compromise. He could do his rounds again, but only in common areas. only under watch. He had to turn in his stethoscope at the end of each day, and he had to hand his report to the head nurse, who would decide what mattered and what didn't. Milton accepted, grateful. Not because he wanted power, but because the act of listening made him feel human. In Comfort House, being listened to was rare. Milton gave that gift, and people responded to it. He wrote down their fears and strange dreams and scattered stories the way a person might collect evidence. He wrote in a way that made the staff see what they usually missed. Some residents didn't look disturbed at all. Some were quiet, polite, and still terrified inside. Others were loud and obvious, but their noise hid something simple underneath. Loneliness, confusion, exhaustion. Milton learned to spot patterns. He learned to translate. In his notes, he tried to separate the person from the symptoms, the soul from the storm. But the question that stayed, the one nobody could answer, was the same question Milton couldn't stop thinking about. Late at night, when the hall lights dimmed and the building grew quiet again, where was Nancy's head? Jim claimed he hadn't taken it. The rooms suggested someone had. The facility's doors were locked, and staff swore nobody had left the unit with anything that size. The security cameras had blind spots. The timeline had holes. People argued, people whispered, people blamed each other. And somewhere beneath all the explanations, beneath the paperwork, the interviews, the medication charts, the careful language used to avoid panic, there was another possibility no one wanted to say out loud. Sometimes in a place full of fear, fear starts to feel real. Sometimes people talk about shadow figures and night hags and voices, and everyone calls it symptoms, stress, trauma, misfiring nerves. But Milton had heard Harold say, "My time is short," with a certainty that didn't feel like a simple delusion. He had heard Margaret talk about something sitting on her chest at night, breathing on her face like it had been waiting for her. He had watched Lewis grip a piece of broken glass and swear he was being told to take people out there, as if something outside the building was calling to him. And he had listened to Jim, who was never soft, describe a cold presence in the dark, a thing that touched him, a thing that pushed him. Milton wrote his report anyway because that's what he did. He listed facts. He noted patterns. He described the shift in mood in the unit in the days before Nancy died. He wrote down how many residents mentioned shadows that week. How many described the same feeling of being watched? How many spoke about nightmares that felt like waking? He handed the report to the head nurse at the end of the day and turned in his stethoscope like a good patient. The nurse skimmed it, sighed, and filed it away, because paperwork had a place for everything. Everything except the part that made your skin crawl. And the mystery of Nancy's missing head stayed unresolved, floating through Comfort House like a bad smell you couldn't locate, like a whisper you heard only when you were alone, like the sense that something had stepped into the building, taken what it wanted, and walked back out again without ever opening a door. Story 3. The sky was heavy and dark when Ryan stepped out of his car, the air thick and damp, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. He slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing across the long, empty driveway. In front of him stood Uncle Selwyn's house, though calling it a house didn't feel accurate anymore. It was an old ancestral manor, large and looming, its tall windows dark and lifeless. As a child, Ryan remembered it as mysterious, even exciting. Now it felt hostile, like something watching him approach. Ryan walked up the front steps and began pounding on the door with his fist, shouting his uncle's name. He did it again and again, anger fueling every knock. Minutes passed. No answer. He kept yelling until his throat started to burn. Still nothing. Headlights appeared behind him. Another car pulled into the driveway, then another. Gary was the first to arrive, climbing out of his old Toyota Tercel. He looked nervous, his eyes darting toward the house, as if it might move when he wasn't looking. Gary was the youngest of the cousins, barely into college, still holding on to the belief that adults, especially Uncle Selwyn, had answers. Jennifer arrived next, parking her BMW carefully despite the tension in the air. She stepped out, composed as always. Even in moments like this, she had worked hard for everything she owned, and it showed in the way she carried herself. Ellie climbed out of the passenger seat behind her, already anxious, already hugging her arms around herself. They all stood there for a moment, staring at the door. Though they were cousins, they had grown up together like siblings. Their parents were all children of the same man, their grandfather, and each family had only one child. Ryan had always taken the role of leader, whether the others liked it or not. As kids, he had been rough, cruel at times, especially to Gary and Ellie. Gary still carried a faint scar on his arm from the day Ryan shoved him down a hill during a summer visit. He had landed on an old rusted can hidden in the grass. Ellie had never forgiven Ryan for locking her in a closet during their grandmother's funeral when she was only 3 years old. That moment became her earliest memory, one she never escaped. Only Uncle Selwyn never had children of his own. When they were younger, Selwyn had been their favorite. He was strange, wild-haired, unable to hold a job, but he was a master storyteller. He could make them laugh until they cried, then frighten them into silence with the same story. He doted on them even as they grew older and stopped believing his tales. All of them drifted away from him eventually, except Gary. Gary never stopped defending him. Everything changed after their grandfather died. Their grandmother had passed quietly years earlier, but their grandfather's death was violent and shocking. The mailman was the one who found him. He had been delivering mail when he heard a horrible mechanical sound coming from the woods behind the house. It was uneven and clogged, like something struggling to work. When he went around back, he found a wood chipper hidden among the trees, and blood everywhere. Their grandfather's body was destroyed beyond recognition. After that, Uncle Selwyn changed. At the funeral, he sat alone, speaking to no one. His wild hair now showed streaks of gray. He inherited the manner, but showed no pride or happiness. He withdrew from the family completely. 6 months later, Ryan's father died. He had been driving home from work when he got a flat tire. What happened next was never fully explained. Police believed he had been struck by a truck and dragged nearly a mile, but no truck was ever reported. What they did find was the shredded tire, a long streak of blood along the road, and his father's mangled body. The worst part was learning that Ryan's father had just received a promotion. He had been excited to come home and tell his family. Jennifer's mother was next. Her law firm rewarded her with a luxury spa weekend. She was found dead inside a tanning bed, her body torn apart by shattered glass. The spa claimed equipment failure, but experts said the damage made no sense. The camera in the room hadn't been working that day. There were no witnesses. One by one, their parents died in horrific accidents. Every death was different, but the result was always the same. Bodies destroyed, lives ended violently, all except Uncle Selwyn. He attended Ryan's father's funeral. After that, he vanished. He never called. He never sent cards. He retreated into the manor and shut himself away. Rumors spread. People whispered that Selwyn had something to do with it. Why else would everyone die while he remained untouched? Gary's father was the last. His car was found overturned at the bottom of a hill. The vehicle itself was mostly intact. His father's body inside was not. After that, the deaths stopped. Years passed. Then Chris died. Chris worked at the docks, unloading cargo from freighters. He had just learned he was going to be a father. He left voicemails for all his cousins, excited, unable to contain the news. Ryan never received his message in time. His voicemail always arrived days late for reasons no one could explain. The last call Chris made was to Jennifer. On that voicemail, she heard shouting, metal snapping, and the sickening sound of shipping containers slamming together. Chris was crushed between them. The funeral was short. The casket was closed. Uncle Selwyn didn't attend. During the service, Ryan received a phone call. He walked out to the parking lot shouting into his phone, then climbed into his car and drove away. Moments later, Jennifer's phone rang. It was the insurance company. They explained that Ryan had hung up on them. Their investigation showed that the cable responsible for Chris's death hadn't snapped. It had been cut. They followed Ryan. Now they stood on Uncle Selwyn's porch, the air heavy, the house silent. Ryan raised his fist again, ready to break the door down when Gary grabbed him. "Ryan, we don't know if—" "Like hell we don't," Ryan snapped, shoving Gary back. "He knows something. He's known for years." The lock turned. The door opened. Uncle Selwyn stood there, pale and exhausted. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. He looked older than his years. His hair was still wild, still unkempt. Ryan lunged forward, but Jennifer placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let him talk." Selwyn ushered them inside. The sitting room felt frozen in time. Old furniture sat beneath blankets. Taxidermied birds and animals stared from every corner with glassy eyes. Their grandfather's old hobby filled the room with silent witnesses. Selwyn leaned against the fireplace, staring into the flames. "I know what's happening," he said quietly, "and I haven't done what you think. You deserve the truth." He exhaled slowly. "Our family is cursed." Ryan moved before anyone could stop him. His fist connected with Uncle Selwyn's jaw in a dull, meaty crack that echoed through the sitting room. Selwyn staggered back a step, catching himself on the edge of the fireplace. The fire flared briefly, sparks lifting into the air, but Selwyn didn't cry out. He only stood there, one hand pressed to his face, his expression dull and resigned, as if he had been expecting it. "You lying piece of shit," Ryan shouted, his voice shaking. "What did you do? What did you do to them?" Jennifer and Ellie grabbed Ryan by the arms, pulling him back. Gary rushed forward instead, checking Selwyn's jaw, his face pale and tight with worry. Selwyn waved him away gently. "I don't blame you," Selwyn said quietly, his voice rough but steady. "If I were you, I would have done the same thing. I wish it wasn't true." Ryan resisted being forced into a chair, his breathing heavy. his hands clenched into fists, so tight his knuckles had gone white. His eyes never left Selwyn. Jennifer stepped between them, her voice controlled but sharp. "Hitting him won't bring anyone back. Let him talk. If he's lying, we'll hear it." Selwyn nodded slowly, still leaning against the fireplace. He looked smaller now, diminished, like a man who had been carrying too much weight for too long. "You hear things when you grow up in a family like ours," Selwyn began. "Things adults talk about when they think children aren't listening. But I always listened. What's been happening to our family isn't new. No one likes to talk about it, but it's happened every generation on this side of the family for over 150 years. Ellie's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean not one generation has died naturally," Selwyn said. "Not one. Accidents, violence, things so strange they get written off because people don't want to believe the alternative." Ryan scoffed, but said nothing. Selwyn stared into the fire again, as if it were easier than looking at them. "It all began with my great-grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, Selwyn Meyer. I'm his namesake." That got their attention. "He was a powerful man," Selwyn continued, "built his fortune in real estate. Some of it honestly, some of it not so much. After years of working himself to the bone, he wanted a place far from the world, somewhere quiet, somewhere he could control." Selwyn gestured around the room. "This land." Ellie shifted uncomfortably. "This house?" "The land came first," Selwyn said. "The house was built later. When Selwyn Meyer found this place, it was already owned by another family. They had lived here since shortly after the Revolutionary War. He offered to buy it, offered them less than it was worth. They refused." Selwyn's mouth tightened. "He offered more, twice the value, then 3 times. They still refused. They said they couldn't leave, that their family had an obligation to the land." Ryan snorted. "So he bullied them." "He assumed they were hiding something," Selwyn said. "Something valuable enough to refuse that kind of money. So he hired men, thugs. He sent them onto the land at night to search for whatever's a family was protecting, and to scare them if they didn't cooperate." Gary swallowed hard. "They found a cave," Selwyn said. "Deep in the woods. Inside it was an altar, and on that altar was a crystal." "What kind of crystal?" Ellie asked. Selwyn hesitated. "Brown, clouded, like it had something trapped inside it." Ellie frowned. "Brown crystals aren't common." "That's because it wasn't a crystal," Selwyn said softly. "Not really." Ryan laughed bitterly. "And this is where it starts talking, right?" "Yes," Selwyn said. "It spoke to him." The room went quiet. Ryan shook his head. "You expect us to believe this?" "I don't care what you believe," Selwyn said. "I care about what's true." He walked to the couch and picked up a dusty leather-bound journal. He tossed it onto the cushion between them. It fell open with a soft thud. "This is his," Selwyn said. "My great-grandfather's journal. No one knew it existed until after my father died." The pages were thick and yellowed, the ink dark and steady despite its age. "He wrote that the crystal begged him," Selwyn continued. "It told him it was imprisoned, that if he freed it, it would help him, make him powerful, protect what he built." Ryan glanced at the journal but didn't touch it. "He smashed it," Selwyn said. "Right there in the cave." The next day, the family who owned the land died in a horse-drawn cart accident on their way into town. Every single one of them. Ellie covered her mouth. And then he bought the land, Selwyn said, built the house, raised his family here. Selwyn's hand clenched into a fist, but something went wrong. Either he tricked it or it tricked him, because that thing didn't leave. It turned on our bloodline. It decided to take everything he loved. Ryan stood abruptly. This is insane. Selwyn slammed his fist down on the mantel. The sharp crack silenced them. He hissed as blood seeped from a split knuckle. There was one fragment of the crystal left, Selwyn said. One piece that didn't break. Whatever came out of that thing cannot stand it. Anyone who holds it is left alone. Gary flipped through the journal, stopping at a page with a crude drawing of a jagged fragment. You're saying this thing spared you? Yes, Selwyn said, because my father gave it to me. The words hung in the air. The day after he gave it to me, Selwyn continued, his voice cracking, was the day the mailman found him halfway inside his wood chipper. It had been waiting. It waited until he gave it up. Ryan stared at him, rage boiling. So Grandpa loved you more than my dad? Ellie's voice trembled. If that's true, why didn't you protect my mom? Selwyn's eyes filled with tears. I tried. I warned them. But I didn't even know the truth back then. I sounded insane. Would you have believed me? No one answered. Selwyn wiped his face. I was going to tell you all tonight. I was going to give the crystal to one of you, but I couldn't choose. His voice broke. And now it's gone. Gary looked up sharply. Gone? It wasn't on my bedside table when I woke up, Selwyn said. And now you're all here. Jennifer stood suddenly. Okay, that's enough. She forced a tight smile. You've had a lot of trauma, Uncle Selwyn. We appreciate you talking to us, but I think it's best if we go. Ryan stared at her. What? Look at him, Jennifer said quietly. Do you really think he could cut a steel cable? He's not a murderer. He's sick and he needs help. She gestured for the others to follow her into the hall. Gary hesitated. What if he's right? Jennifer sighed. What's more likely? A monster killing our family, or a series of tragic accidents and a man who feels responsible? They turned back toward the sitting room. Selwyn was gone. The room was empty, the fire crackling softly. Ellie wandered down a side hallway, calling his name. Ryan slammed his fist into the couch, dust rising into the air. Gary sat down slowly, staring at the journal. What if it's real? Footsteps echoed. Ellie ran back, pale. There's a room back there. You need to see it. They followed her into a small office. Newspaper clippings covered the walls. Obituaries, their parents, their grandparents, older ones going back generations. Each had notes scribbled beside it, detailing violent deaths. He was studying them, Ellie whispered. A loud crash echoed from upstairs. They ran. Jennifer lay at the bottom of the staircase, her body torn apart, barely recognizable. Her phone lay beside her, playing a calm voice on loop, repeating, "All is well." No one moved. Fog rolled in outside. Ellie screamed. Ryan's car rolled forward on its own. Ellie was crushed. Ryan dropped to his knees. Gary vanished. Ryan picked up an axe, and the house went silent. Ryan stood frozen on the porch, the sound of Ellie's bones breaking still echoing in his ears. The car rested at an impossible angle against the shattered porch steps, its engine silent, headlights off, as if it had rolled forward of its own will, and then decided it was finished. All Ryan could see was Ellie's hand beneath the fender, pale and unmoving, fingers twisted at an angle that made his stomach turn. He dropped to his knees beside her, shaking, calling her name over and over, his voice cracking. He pressed his fingers to her wrist, then her neck, desperately searching for a pulse he already knew wouldn't be there. There was nothing, no warmth, no response. Ellie was gone. Ryan staggered backward and sat heavily on the porch boards, staring at the wreckage. His mind tried to reject what had just happened. Cars didn't roll on their own. People didn't die like this, not one after another, not within minutes. Not unless something was very, very wrong. He forced himself to stand and look towards the driveway. Gary's car sat where it had been parked, empty. The driver's door was open. Ryan walked toward his own car, stepping carefully around debris. The driver's side door hung open. Inside, the smell of fast food wrappers and old mail hit him. Envelopes were scattered across the passenger seat, just as he had left them earlier. But Gary wasn't there. Ryan's chest tightened. "Gary!" he called out, his voice sounding small against the house. No answer. A terrible thought pushed its way into his mind, one he didn't want but couldn't stop. Gary had always been Uncle Selwyn's favorite. Gary believed him. Gary had stayed behind with the journal. What if Gary wasn't a victim? What if he had helped Selwyn? Or worse, what if he believed every word? Ryan shook his head hard. He didn't know. And now he couldn't afford to assume anything. He needed something to defend himself. Moving around the side of the house, Ryan found a woodpile stacked neatly near the back wall. Beside it leaned an old axe, the handle worn smooth from years of use. After what had happened to their grandfather, it made a horrible kind of sense that Selwyn would choose tools like this instead of machines. Ryan picked up the axe. It felt heavy and real in his hands, grounding him just enough to move. He went inside through the back door. The house was quiet, too quiet. No creaking floors, no distant footsteps, just the faint sound of something upstairs. A dull, repeating thump that made his skin crawl. Ryan moved slowly through the hallway, checking corners, holding the axe tight. Every shadow felt like it might move. Every sound made his heart jump. He kept his back to the wall, his eyes fixed on the staircase. Another thump came from above. Ryan climbed the stairs, one step at a time, careful not to make a sound. The noise seemed to come from the second bedroom on the left, one of the few doors that was closed. He stopped in front of it, listening. Thump, thump. Ryan reached for the handle and turned it slowly. The room beyond was clearly Uncle Selwyn's bedroom. Clothes lay draped over chairs. Books and papers covered the desk. The bed was unmade. And standing at the window was Selwyn. He was facing outward, his forehead pressed against the glass. He was banging his head against it, over and over, producing the dull sound Ryan had heard. There was no visible blood, but the skin on his forehead was red and angry. "Uncle Selwyn," Ryan said, raising the axe. His voice shook despite his effort to sound firm. "You need to come with me. I'm taking you somewhere you can get help." Selwyn stopped banging his head. Slowly, he turned around. "I'm not the one who needs help," Selwyn said calmly. "It's too late for that." Ryan's grip tightened. "You need to stop. You need to come now." Selwyn tilted his head. "You didn't find the shard, did you?" "There is no shard," Ryan snapped. "There is no curse. There is no monster. You're sick, and people are dead because of it." Selwyn smiled. "So you still don't believe," he said softly. "That's good." He took a step toward Ryan. Something was wrong. As Selwyn moved, his body seemed to stretch, his limbs growing longer, thinner, his shoulders hunched unnaturally. His skin began to sag, then slide, like wax melting from a candle. His lips pulled back, tearing slightly at the corners, revealing rows of long, sharp teeth that had no place in a human mouth. Ryan dropped the axe. "Sometimes," Selwyn said, his voice changing, layering over itself, "it's nice to stop pretending." Talons pushed through the ends of his fingers, tearing through skin and nail. His eyes darkened, swallowing the whites, reflecting the room with an unnatural shine. "I love hope," the thing said. "I love belief. I love when people are sure everything will be fine. It makes them taste better." Ryan collapsed to his knees, sobbing, his mind finally breaking under the weight of it all. "And when non-believers see me," the creature continued, stepping closer, "hope is at its strongest." It screamed. Far from the manor, Gary woke face down in the mud, gasping for air. His head throbbed, his body aching, but he was alive. He remembered running to the car, remembered grabbing Ryan's phone, remembered something yanking him sideways, impossibly strong. He pushed himself up and saw his car nearby. Door open, interior torn apart. Mail was scattered everywhere. In his hand, he clutched one envelope. There was no return address, but he recognized the handwriting, Uncle Selwyn's. Gary's hands shook as Ryan's phone buzzed. A voicemail notification appeared, dated nearly a week earlier. Ryan's phone always did that, delivering messages days late. Gary unlocked the phone and listened. "Hi, Ryan," Selwyn's voice said. "It's Uncle Selwyn. I know we never got along, but I hope you keep what I sent you." Gary's breath caught. "My father gave it to me the day before he died, not out of love. He hated me, Ryan. He wanted me to suffer, to watch everyone I loved die." There was a pause. "I held on to the crystal. I watched your parents die, my brothers and sisters die, and I did nothing. I was a coward." The sound of a door opening echoed faintly in the background. "But you're not like me. You're decisive. You'll know what to do when the time comes. Maybe you'll protect them better than I did." Another pause. "It's here." A breath. "I love you all." The voicemail ended with a scream so sharp and raw that Gary dropped the phone into the mud. Somewhere behind him, the manor stood silent again, and whatever had fed that night was finally satisfied. Story 4. Marshall Blake woke up at his desk again, the same way he'd been waking up too often lately. Chin dipped, shoulders stiff, eyes gritty like he'd been sand-blasted. The glow from his monitor washed the room in a sickly blue, and the half-finished logo draft on screen looked like it belonged to someone else. His coffee sat to the right of the keyboard, cold enough that the surface had gone dull. He rubbed both hands down his face and reached for his phone to check the time. That's when he saw the notepad. 2 lines, black ink, clean, careful letters, star, and under it, a word that didn't belong to any language he knew. Go goin'. The pen beside the pad was capped. He stared for a full 10 seconds, waiting for his memory to catch up. Nothing arrived. He didn't remember writing anything after 10. He didn't remember picking up the pen at all. His handwriting leaned to the right, fast and messy. These letters stood straight, evenly spaced, like someone had taken their time and wanted to be understood. He picked up the pen, uncapped it, and tried to copy the letters. His strokes looked wrong immediately, too rushed, too uneven. He tried again, slower, and still couldn't match it. A small chill walked up his spine. He pressed his thumb to the ink on the notepad. It smudged faintly, still fresh. Marshall looked around the room as if the answer might be sitting on the couch or hiding behind a curtain. The farmhouse was silent except for the faint hum of his computer fan and the occasional pop from the heater. No footsteps, no creaking boards, no movement in the dark corners. He swallowed, then spoke out loud because the sound of his own voice made the room feel less empty. "You probably wrote it half asleep." It was the most reasonable explanation, and he forced himself to hold on to it, even though the thought didn't sit right in his chest. He took a photo of the notepad and texted it to his friend Dylan. "Woke up to this." "Not my handwriting," Dylan replied almost immediately. "Sleep writing. Happens to geniuses and lunatics." Marshall typed back with his thumb. "Pen was capped. Then your ghosts got manners." That made him snort a laugh in spite of himself. He set the phone down and looked at the notepad again. The word didn't look random. It looked deliberate, like someone had written it slowly, focused, making sure each letter was clear. He sounded it out under his breath. Go, and... The shape of it felt wrong in his mouth. He opened his browser and typed it into a search bar. The results were garbage. Autocorrect trying to turn it into Shogun. A handful of dead links. Old forum posts from people who collected strange words like they were coins. One thread was a mess of arguments and jokes, but one half sentence stood out enough to catch in his mind. "The show-goin' light falls on those who look too long." Marshall closed the window without clicking anything else. He told himself that was enough internet for one night. But the sentence followed him anyway. Like a tune you can't stop hearing once it starts. Morning didn't make it less strange. If anything, daylight made the ink look sharper. Marshall sat with fresh coffee and stared at the two words again. The farmhouse was quiet, except for the heaters on and off clicking, the kind of background noise that usually soothed him. That quiet was why he'd rented this place in the first place. Cheap rent, plenty of room, no neighbors close enough to make small talk. He could work and think without the world breathing down his neck. But lately the quiet had started to feel like pressure. He tried to get back to work. He answered emails. He revised a client draft. He forced himself through little tasks just to prove he could still be normal. But his eyes kept sliding toward the notepad like it was magnetic. Every time he looked, part of him expected the ink to have faded or vanished, like a dream evaporating once you stare directly at it. It didn't fade. By mid-afternoon, he shut the laptop. The sky outside was still the color of wet concrete, and the air smelled like rain that never quite finished falling. He thought about taking a walk, maybe meeting a neighbor, reminding himself there were other people in the world. He put on his jacket, opened the front door, and immediately reconsidered. The yard was a slick mess. Mud reflected the dim light like black glass, and the smell of wet earth felt heavy, almost sour. He stepped back inside and locked the door without thinking. He made a sandwich, turned on the radio for noise, and ate at the counter. The news droned on about a wreck on Highway 18 and more rain in the forecast. The signal crackled and dropped for a few seconds, then returned as if nothing had happened. When he turned the radio off again, the house returned to its deep, padded silence. Marshall caught himself listening for movement that wasn't there. He walked through the rooms anyway, checking doors and windows like he was humoring a paranoid part of his brain. Everything was locked. Everything was still. He returned to the desk. The notepad looked exactly the same. Star, Gogone. He tore the sheet off and held it up to the lamp. The ink caught the light and revealed faint pressure marks in the paper beneath each stroke. Whoever wrote it had pressed hard, like they needed the letters to leave a physical imprint, as if the message mattered more than the page itself. He set it down and said, "Quieter this time. You did this. You just don't remember." He tried to believe it. Then he remembered the cheap webcam in his drawer, the one he used to record time lapses when he designed, mostly for fun, mostly for proof that work happened even when it felt like it didn't. He clipped it to the monitor and angled it toward the notepad. The green LED blinked alive. "If you move again," he whispered, "I'll see it." He left the camera running and went to bed. He woke sometime after 3. The house was cold, the heater off. Rain ticked softly against the windows. He sat up, stared toward the office doorway, and saw the faint green glow of the webcam in the darkness. Marshall walked back to the desk and stopped the recording. When the laptop screen came alive, the notepad sat in the same spot, perfectly framed. Except there was a third word now, written beneath the first 2. Find. Marshall's stomach dropped. He turned and looked at the room as if he expected someone to be standing behind him. No one was. He glanced at the recording timer. It had stopped 20 minutes ago. He scrolled backward through the footage. For a long time, nothing happened. Just him working, shifting in his chair, getting up for water, leaving. Then the image went fuzzy with static. The screen flickered. Distortion rippled through the frame like heat on asphalt. A shape leaned in from the side. It wasn't clear enough to identify, just a blurred figure bending over the desk. One arm lifted, moved in short strokes like writing. Then the image froze for a split second, and when it resumed, the figure was gone. Marshall's breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer, rewound it again, slowed it down. The distortion happened in the same spot every time, like a glitch timed perfectly to hide what mattered. He watched that blurred arm move again and again until his eyes burned. He stared at the notepad. Star, Gogone, find. He shut off the camera, closed the laptop, and left the page where it was. He brewed fresh coffee and watched the first gray hint of dawn seep into the kitchen. He told himself there had to be a reason. There was always a reason. But none of the reasons in his head felt big enough to cover what he'd just seen. The next morning he tried to convince himself it was fatigue and isolation doing tricks on him. Stress could warp perception. Lack of sleep could make the world feel unreal, and a cheap webcam could glitch. That logic lasted until he stepped out of the shower. The bathroom mirror was fogged over, the glass filmed with steam. Marshall glanced up and froze. Letters had been traced into the moisture, clean and deliberate, like a finger had written them while he stood under the water. Gogone. His throat tightened. He wiped the mirror hard with a towel. The steam cleared, but for a fraction of a second the letters seemed to cling to the glass anyway, faint and stubborn before finally disappearing. He turned away fast, heart beating too hard. Maybe it was him, he told himself. Maybe he'd written it without thinking, like an anxious habit, like doodling. People did weird things when they weren't sleeping. People forgot. Still, as he made coffee, he avoided looking at the desk. By late morning, he forced himself out of the house. He needed sunlight. He needed proof that the world was still normal outside his walls. The gravel road was soft from rain, and puddles collected in the ditches like dull mirrors. He walked until he reached a split-rail fence and an open gate leading into a small pasture. A woman in a denim jacket and rubber boots was tossing feed to chickens near a weathered shed. When she saw him, she waved. "You must be the new tenant," she called. "Yeah," Marshall said. "Marshall Blake. Grace Connolly. Next field over." She nodded toward his house in the distance. "That place been empty a while. You fixing it up?" "Just renting," he said. "Needed quiet for work." Grace smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You'll get that out here," she said. Then her tone shifted, cautious, like she'd stepped onto thin ice. "You're not the first to say that." Marshall caught it immediately. "Someone lived there before?" "A young woman," Grace said. "Mara Ellison." The name hit Marshall strangely, like a bell rung in another room. "She move away?" Grace hesitated. Something like that. Before he could press, a chicken fluttered up onto the fence rail, startling them both. Grace laughed and the tension slipped away just a little. "If you need anything," she said, "tools, company, whatever, you know where to find me." Marshall thanked her and walked back home, with the wind pushing damp air against his face. The whole way back, the name Mara Ellison replayed in his head. That night, he tried to work. He set his phone beside the notepad and opened a new document, forcing himself into the familiar rhythm of design. But every few minutes his gaze drifted to the pad, waiting for another word, another sign, another impossible message. He told himself that if nothing happened, he'd drop it. He'd blame it on stress and move on. Around midnight, the power flickered. The desk lamp went dark for 2 seconds, then buzzed back to life. Marshall jumped anyway. His phone, lying face down, lit up on its own. The flashlight was on. He stared at it, confused, then picked it up and flipped it over. No notification, no incoming call, just the blank lock screen and the glaring beam, perfectly aimed at the notepad like it had been positioned. Marshall's hands went cold. He turned the phone light off, then looked down. A new word had appeared beneath the others, written in the same careful hand. Beneath. He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. He looked at the windows, the door, the hallway, every dark corner like an animal expecting a predator. Nothing moved. Only the heater clicking, loud in the sudden silence, made him flinch. He snapped a photo of the pad, zoomed in until the letters filled the screen. Then he turned off the lamp and went to bed without undressing, like if he moved too slowly the house would notice. In the morning, sunlight leaked through the blinds and the words were still there. Star, Gogone, find, beneath. Marshall sat with coffee and stared at the page until his eyes ached. If someone was breaking in, they weren't stealing, they weren't leaving footprints. The camera had glitched at the exact wrong moment, and now his phone was acting like it had a mind of its own. He thought about calling Dylan, but he could already hear the jokes. Go outside, touch grass, stop living like a vampire. So he went to the window instead. Behind the house stood a large oak tree, thick and old, its bark dark from rain. Roots rose from the earth like knuckles. Beneath it, A patch of soil looked darker than the rest, as if it had been disturbed recently. It sat in a shallow dip, subtle enough that he hadn't noticed it before, but now he couldn't unsee it. He looked away before his mind could finish building the thought. That evening he searched Mara Ellison's name. Mara Ellison, Kubrick Creek. An old article popped up immediately. Local woman still missing. He clicked it, and the photo on the page hit him like a slap. Mara was smiling in front of a house. His house. The article said she'd been renting the property and vanished one night without a trace. No signs of struggle. No evidence of foul play. No leads. People speculated she'd run away, but no one could explain why she'd leave her car and her belongings behind. At the bottom, the investigating officer was listed. Deputy Owen Rourke. Marshall read the article twice, then shut the laptop and sat in the quiet, listening to the house breathe. His eyes drifted back to the notepad. The words looked less like a prank now and more like a trail. Star, find, beneath. He picked up the pen and wrote a word of his own under the last line. Why? He set the pen down and waited. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere below the floor, he heard 3 soft knocks. Marshall froze, not sure if he'd imagined it. But then the sound came again, clearer, like a fist tapping wood from the other side. He swallowed hard. "Who's there?" he said. Silence. Then a single knock answered him. Marshall backed away from the desk, grabbed his phone, and opened the camera. He hit record and aimed it toward the floor and the notepad, stepping to the side like he expected something to rise up. He didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table and replayed the video over and over. The image showed nothing but darkness and stillness, but the sound was there. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. He turned the volume up until it crackled. The tapping was faint but distinct, like someone tapping a pipe with a spoon. He heard his own whisper on the recording, "Who's there?" And then the single reply knock. By morning, he wasn't tired so much as hollowed out. He decided to check under the house. The crawl space hatch was in the hallway, a square panel held by rusted screws. Marshall fetched a screwdriver, removed the screws, and lifted the panel. Stale air drifted up, cold and earthy with something faintly metallic like old coins. He lay on his stomach and shone his flashlight inside. The beam caught cobwebs and dark soil, wooden beams like ribs. He swept side to side. A glint of metal winked back at him. Marshall reached in and pulled it out. It was a broken key ring with a single piece left, a small metal tag shaped like a star. One edge was bent like it had been crushed under pressure. He sat up slowly, staring at it in his palm, his skin prickling. That night the knocks returned, louder, closer. Marshall pressed his ear to the floorboards and whispered the name he hadn't been able to forget since seeing the article. Mara. The tapping stopped. Then he heard something else, faint, slow, like fingernails scraping wood from underneath. The sound traveled beneath him, inching forward, deliberate, as if whatever made it knew exactly where he was. Marshall jerked back so fast he hit the wall. His heart hammered in his ears. He didn't move until the sound faded. Then he slammed the crawlspace panel shut and dragged a heavy chair over it like that could keep anything out. When he went back to the desk, the notepad had changed. A fresh word had been written beneath the others. Home. The pen lay uncapped beside it. Marshall stared until his vision blurred. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. The heater clicked on, and the house answered with nothing else. The next day, he went to see Grace again. She was on her porch, bundling herbs when he approached. One look at his face made her sit up straight. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "I might have," Marshall replied. He told her about the words, the mirror, the knocking, the star tag. Grace's expression tightened with each detail, as if she had been afraid of this exact conversation for years. "You need to stop," she said when he finished. "Whatever's in that house, you don't poke it. You don't feed it attention." "She's trying to tell me something," Marshall said. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she set the herbs down. "I knew Mara," she admitted. "Not close, but I checked on her. Brought eggs sometimes. She was nervous near the end." "Nervous about what?" Grace looked away toward the field, like she didn't want to see his face when she said it. "Deputy Rourke used to come by after dark." Marshall's stomach turned. They were seeing each other? Grace nodded once. He was married then. Folks don't talk about it, but they know. "What happened the night she disappeared?" Grace swallowed. "There was shouting. I heard it from my kitchen. I should have gone over. I didn't. After that, she was gone." Marshall walked back home in a state that felt like stepping outside his own body. He stared at the oak tree behind the house, and that darker patch of soil, now more obvious than ever. He picked up a shovel. By the time he stepped into the yard, the sky had gone heavy again, threatening rain. The ground pulled at his boots. He stood beneath the oak, heart punching hard, and drove the shovel into the soft earth. The first scoops were just wet soil and roots. Then the shovel hit something solid with a dull thud. Marshall dropped to his knees and scraped away the dirt with his hands. A board, old, damp, and beneath it, fabric that had rotted into clumps. Then something smooth and pale, bone. Marshall leaned back, dizzy, mud soaking through his jeans. The air smelled like wet earth and something worse, something that had waited too long to be found. A flash of lightning lit the yard, and for an instant, he thought he saw a figure standing near the fence line. Hair hanging forward, shoulders slumped, unmoving. When the light faded, the yard was empty again. Marshall stumbled back into the house and slammed the door. His hands shook as he looked at the notepad. The page was different. The old words were crossed out, heavy lines through them like a final decision. In their place was one neat sentence written in wet ink that still shined under the kitchen light. "You found me." Marshall stared, breath shallow. He felt less afraid now than he had been, because fear was too small for what this was. This was something else, a request, a demand, a presence that had refused to go away until someone finally looked. His phone buzzed on the counter. Same unknown number. "Come back." Marshall looked at the window, at the oak tree and the hole in the ground. Rain began again, soft at first. He went back outside. The hole waited exactly where he'd left it. Mud slid slowly at the edges. The flashlight beam cut into the dark and illuminated the board and the pale shape beneath. Then behind him, gravel crunched. Headlights rolled up the drive like slow eyes opening. Deputy Owen Rourke stepped out of his vehicle, rain slicking his uniform. His flashlight was already in his hand, aimed forward like a weapon. "What the hell are you doing?" he called, voice sharp and practiced. Marshall stood, mud on his hands, rain running down his face. "I found her," he said. Rourke moved closer, beam sweeping the hole. When he saw the bone, his posture changed. His shoulders stiffened, his mouth opened, then closed again, like his body had forgotten how to speak. "Back away," Rourke said, too controlled. "Now." "You put her here," Marshall said. Rourke's eyes flashed, his hand hovered near his holster. "Watch your mouth." "You were coming to the house at night," Marshall pressed. "Grace told me you fought with her. You didn't report her missing like a stranger would. You acted like you already knew she wasn't coming back." Rourke's jaw worked like he was grinding something between his teeth. "You don't know anything." Marshall's voice shook, but he didn't stop. "What did she say to you? The night she died, what did she keep saying?" For a moment, Rourke's face looked less like a cop and more like a man cornered by his own memories. "She wouldn't stop," he muttered. "She kept saying it, over and over." Marshall felt his pulse in his throat. "Go home," he said, and the words tasted like cold metal. "That's what she kept saying, right? Go home." Rourke's flashlight trembled. "How do you know that?" Marshall swallowed hard. "It's been written all over the house," he said. "Go gone." I thought it was a strange word. But it's not. It's her voice, twisted by whatever's left. Go home. She's been trying to make someone listen. The rain thickened, hammering the mud. Wind shoved the oak branches overhead. Rourke's face drained of color. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not." The ground shuddered. It wasn't a huge earthquake. It was a quick, sharp tremor right beneath their feet, like the earth had flexed. Rourke stumbled back. His boot slipped near the hole. He threw out an arm to steady himself, but the edge of the pit gave way under his weight. "Stay back," he barked, but he was already going down, mud swallowing his legs. He tried to scramble, palms slick, fingers digging into wet soil that offered no grip. "Help me!" he shouted, panic breaking through the authority. Marshall stepped forward instinctively, but another chunk collapsed, sliding into the hole like the ground was hungry. Rourke's flashlight fell, spinning, and landed beam up, shining directly onto the bones below. The light made everything look too clear, too final. Rourke screamed a short, helpless sound, and then the earth took him. Marshall jumped back as the hole folded in on itself. Mud and water rushed down, swallowing the space, filling it, smoothing it over. Within seconds, it looked like nothing had ever been there. Just a dark patch of churned soil beneath an oak tree. The rain kept falling. Marshall stood there shaking, staring at the spot where a man had been one moment and gone the next. He didn't know if what happened was nature, fate, or something far older and stranger, but he knew it wasn't an accident. When he turned to go back inside, his flashlight beam caught something half buried in the mud near the tree. A necklace, a small silver star pendant on a broken chain. Marshall picked it up and turned it over. Engraved on the back were 2 letters, M.E. He brought it inside, washed the mud from his hands and the pendant, and set it on the kitchen table beside the notepad. The house felt different now, still quiet, but not heavy. Quiet like after a storm passes, when the air finally lets you breathe. The notepad lay open. The page with all the earlier words was gone, torn cleanly away. A fresh page waited, and on it was a single line of neat handwriting. "Thank you." Marshall stared at it, then slowly sat down. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat there until daylight softened the edges of the room. The next afternoon, Grace Connolly came by because she hadn't seen a sheriff's car leave, and something in her gut wouldn't let her ignore the silence. The front door was unlocked. She stepped inside carefully and found Marshall asleep at the kitchen table, pale but alive. The star pendant lay near his hand, clean now, as if someone had cared enough to make it presentable. Grace picked up the pendant and turned it over. M.E. Her throat tightened. She set it back down gently. She noticed the notepad under Marshall's hand. The word "thank you" was there, and beneath it, written in the same careful ink, was one last word: free. Grace closed the pad without making a sound. She walked out of the farmhouse and back across the field to her own home. She didn't call anyone. She didn't tell anyone what she'd seen or what she'd read. She understood, in a way she couldn't explain, that this was not a story meant for the whole town. That night, rain fell again over Kubrick Creek, but no one heard tapping beneath the old farmhouse anymore. No knocks, no scraping, no strange words showing up where they didn't belong. The oak tree stood steady in the yard, its roots gripping the ground like hands that had finally let go, and the word "go goin'" never appeared again. Mara could finally rest. Mara had finally gone home.